acceptable policy that is capable of emerging at the end, a policy approved by the strongest actors, and then polarizes. Anyone who won't accept that policy must be against the well-being of the country, and finally you arrive at a settlement. These are very different patterns, and I just wanted to bring that out because it came as a sort of one of those things, as soon as you see it, you realize that's what's happening, and it's really rather odd. We've seen it now in healthcare, in the pre-legislation dealings with the large insurers and big pharma, and we've seen it in energy policy with his advanced concessions to nuclear energy, to oil, disastrously timed, as it turned out. And I think there's one coming, if cap and trade had been still on the table now, to coal soon after. Again, the timing was bad with the West Virginia mining disaster. What we get in every case is a weaker policy than we might have had from a president who took charge of policy from the start instead of managing from the background, and who could explain his policy from the start in a popular way. This point has just been made, so I won't reiterate it. Obama has asked Democrats to make some very hard votes without backing them except in the most general manner and without explaining his details, because the details under this method I've just laid out are unusually fluid until the very end of the process. Now, why does he do it? Delusion aside, why does he follow this pattern in the face of at least partial defeat thus far? Well, he has a moment in Roosevelt's administration in mind, which he's quoted to several people, including the columnist M.J. Rosenberg, from whom I heard it. Rosenberg was talking to Obama about all the things he'd like to see done by Obama as a left-wing reforming president. And Obama said, this was in an encounter in early 2008, "I can't hear you. I can't hear you." What he meant was, you got to have a movement behind you, you got to be saying it in gongs, and then I can rally behind the movement. Now this is he was repeating something that Roosevelt had said to A. Philip Randolph, when Randolph was head of the train porters union. But that was a rather different age, and that was an age when organized labor was very strong, and when the mass movements against the Depression, or with grievances on behalf of those suffering the worst effects of the Depression, really were already a given in politics. There are no mass movements of a comparable sort associated with Obama unless he took his campaign workers to be a mass movement. And that, it may be so, but it's, again, I think a rather odd error to assume that he could wait until the mass movement became a groundswell. He, in fact, came in at an interesting moment of possible transition, and I think his advertising for himself on this was plausible, if not necessarily accurate. It was a moment of such consummate disgust with the Bush and Cheney policies, both domestic and foreign, that much might have been possible if one turned and used that disgust for a reversal. Now, a puzzle that looms very large for me about Barack Obama is that he has not emerged as a good or effective explainer. He is a quick study. He is very articulate in a way that we academics know well. He makes distinctions. He speaks slowly and does not drop vulgar phrases without a thought. He's the opposite of his predecessor in that respect. But to explain a policy so that people understand it early and want to back it and know what they are getting, that is a different skill. He hasn't yet come into it. I hope he does. But it's hard to see much sign of self-revision to correct his weakness. A significant part of the equipment for a leader who wants to change laws and practices in a country like this is to be able to explain those larger things. And I would compare Lincoln here in a very different light than Eugene Goodheart brought to that comparison. Lincoln's principle throughout his political career from 1854 to 61 in particular, when he was explaining to the country. It was not Union. Union came in during the Civil War, and that's a very tactical, rhetorical kind of emphasis, which we could talk about more if people are interested in it. No, Lincoln's principle was no extension of slavery. No extension of slavery. It was not anti-slavery, but what Lincoln said was he he would place the institution where the public mind would rest that it was in course of ultimate extinction. He repeated that phrase 100 times. It will be in course of ultimate extinction. So he said, we're going to make this thing go away because it is a blot on our national morale. Try to think of one phrase that Barack Obama has repeated. He has that academic quality too. He doesn't like to repeat himself. But politicians have to repeat themselves. They have to find the right phrase and make it sink in, and it has to have some salt. And this academics repeat themselves, not in exactly the same phrase unless they're very shameless. Academics, they do it with slight variations. They make you think they're saying something else, and if they have a certain vice, they keep it vague. And I'm afraid he does have that academic vice of keeping it vague, of over-elaboration and under-definition. So, you know, what would an Obama-like laying down of a principle have resembled if he followed this Lincolnian pattern of explaining no extension of slavery? Well, maybe saying, we call health care a human right, and we will not have a country in which anyone is deprived of the most necessary kind of health care, period. Or global warming, don't call it climate change, is a fact of the future of the planet with which anyone with children or grandchildren should care about, and we can't let it wait another minute. These things haven't been said so plainly by him, and it seems not in his nature so far as a leader to say them so. Disappointment. Literally, to make an appointment which you don't keep. He is the reason for some disappointment that people have been feeling. It is not just the circumstances he found himself thrown in. I'll just touch on civil liberties, national security, and foreign policy very briefly. One can say a lot. On the Sixth Amendment, on a speedy and fair trial, think of Eric Holder, the Attorney General, invoking very extensively in 2 separate cases the privilege of state secrets, across the board invocation of state secrets, to limit the materials available to plaintiffs against the Bush-Cheney administration in lawsuits about torture. Think of the fact that Barack Obama has invoked more extended Predator drone attacks with Hellfire missiles for assassinations on foreign soil with no oversight. We don't know how those decisions are made, and the civilian casualties about which, who wrote The Dark Side, the New Yorker writer? Jane Mayer had a fine article a few weeks ago. The proportion of civilian casualties to actually achieved killings of targets is so disturbing that oversight would seem in order for pragmatic reasons alone. And he has recently claimed, as many of you will know, the right to assassinate, the executive privilege, the executive power to assassinate an American on foreign soil, Anwar al-Awlaki, the radical Muslim demagogue said to be in Yemen, whose sermons inspired the Times Square bomber. All these are extensions of an older policy, sometimes into dangerous new areas without publicity. And he has overall, in the Afghanistan policy and the Middle East policy more broadly, exhibited an unabated reliance on mercenaries to do the work of American arms. I'll skip to the end. David Hume says in Politics May Be Reduced to a Science that a constitution is only so far good as it provides a remedy against maladministration. I would put it to us that maladministration is the best word for what we saw in the 8 years of the Cheney-Bush administration. We came out of a time of maladministration, more consistent and poisonous than any that had been imagined by the American founders. Obama thus far has done a poor job of using the resources of the Constitution to provide remedies available for the worst abuses of that time. And here I think his determination to look forward, to look to the future, not the past, is deadly. It means that there is no remedy. It means that we're on a new tack and we don't have to think about what has happened as connected with us. Some of those abuses, as Mr. Zelizer just said, he has in fact extended. very likely both because they enhance his own available arsenal for the deployment of executive